At family dinner, my daughter screamed, "You're a burden and we don't want you here." But the crystal wine glasses caught the chandelier light as I set the table for what I thought would be a perfect family dinner. At 58, I'd spent decades perfecting these moments. The linen napkins folded just right, the roast beef cooked to medium rare perfection, the dining room in our suburban Connecticut home gleaming like something from a magazine. My name is Eleanor Matthews, and I used to believe that love meant sacrificing everything for your family. That Thursday evening in November started like so many others. My daughter Jessica, 32 and sharp-tongued like her father, arrived with her husband Brad and their twin boys. My son Michael, 29 and perpetually struggling with his art career, slouched through the door 30 minutes late. The familiar weight of expectation settled on my shoulders as I bustled between kitchen and dining room, ensuring everything was perfect. "Mom, the potatoes are too salty," Jessica announced, before she'd even fully sat down. Her voice carried that particular tone I'd grown accustomed to, the one that made me feel like a child being scolded rather than the woman who'd raised her. I'd been hearing variations of this criticism for years. Nothing I did was ever quite right in Jessica's eyes. The house wasn't clean enough when she visited with the boys. My cooking was either too bland or too seasoned. My clothes were outdated, my opinions irrelevant, my presence increasingly unwelcome in what had once been my own domain. "I can make new ones," I offered, already half rising from my chair. "Don't bother," she snapped. "We can't stay long anyway. The boys have early soccer practice tomorrow." Michael picked at his food, avoiding eye contact as usual. My son had been living in my basement for 3 months after his latest girlfriend kicked him out. But somehow, I'd become the villain in his story too. Every suggestion I made about job hunting or cleaning his space was met with sullen silence or accusations that I didn't understand his artistic vision. The conversation limped along through stilted small talk about the weather and neighborhood gossip. I found myself walking on eggshells, choosing each word carefully to avoid triggering one of Jessica's sharp retorts. When had I become so afraid of my own children? The answer, I realized, lay in the slow erosion of boundaries that had happened over the years. After my husband Robert died 4 years ago, I'd thrown myself into being the perfect mother and grandmother, hoping to fill the void his absence left in all our lives. But instead of appreciation, I'd received increasing demands and decreasing respect. Jessica's phone buzzed constantly throughout dinner, and she answered every text while I tried to engage my grandsons in conversation. 8-year-old Tommy and Tyler were sweet boys, but even they seemed to sense the tension that surrounded these family gatherings. "Grandma Eleanor," Tommy asked innocently, "why do you always look sad when we come over?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Out of the mouths of babes came the truth I'd been avoiding. I was sad, desperately, achingly sad, and apparently it showed. "She's not sad," Jessica interjected sharply. "She's just getting old and dramatic." The casual cruelty of the comment made me flinch. When had my daughter learned to speak to me with such dismissive contempt? I tried to remember the sweet little girl who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories, but that child felt like a stranger now. As I served dessert, a homemade apple pie that had taken me 3 hours to prepare, Jessica's phone rang. She answered it immediately despite my gentle reminder that we were still eating. "What? Tonight? But I thought we had until Friday," she said into the phone, her voice taking on the apologetic, people-pleasing tone she reserved for everyone except her family. The conversation continued for several minutes, while the rest of us sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, she hung up and turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of frustration, anger, and something that looked almost like hatred. That's when everything changed. That's when the careful facade I'd been maintaining for years finally crumbled, and the truth of what my family really thought of me came crashing down around the dining room table where I'd served thousands of meals with love. If you're watching this story unfold and recognize the pain of family dysfunction, please like and subscribe. Sometimes we need to know we're not alone in our struggles. "I can't deal with this anymore," Jessica exploded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The phone call had been from her boss, something about a presentation deadline, but somehow her work stress had transformed into rage aimed directly at me. The twins stopped eating and stared with wide eyes. Michael finally looked up from his plate, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure that happens right before a storm hits. I sat frozen, my fork halfway to my mouth, watching my daughter's face contort with an anger I'd never seen directed at me before. "Every time I come here, it's the same thing," she continued, her voice rising. "You hover, you guilt trip, you act like we owe you something just because you cooked dinner." I set down my fork carefully, my hands beginning to tremble. "Jessica, I don't understand. I thought you enjoyed our family dinners." "Enjoyed?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mom, these dinners are obligations, chores. Do you think we actually want to spend our Thursday evenings listening to you complain about your book club drama or your neighbor's dog?" Each word landed like a physical blow. I'd thought our conversations were meaningful connections. I'd looked forward to these evenings all week, planning menus and topics of conversation, hoping to create the kind of warm family memories I'd cherished from my own childhood. "I never meant to complain," I said quietly. "I thought I was sharing my life with you." "Your life?" Jessica's voice dripped with disdain. "Mom, your life is pathetic. You have no friends except those bitter old women in your book club. You have no hobbies except obsessing over this house. You have no purpose except trying to insert yourself into our lives where you don't belong." Michael shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. He never stood up to Jessica, never defended me. In his silence, I heard agreement with her assessment of my worth. The pattern had been building for months, maybe years, but I'd been too blind to see it. The eye rolls when I talked, the quick changes of subject when I tried to share something that mattered to me, the way they checked their phones constantly when I spoke, as if my words were background noise to be endured rather than listened to. "After Dad died," Jessica continued, "we tried to be patient. We understood you were grieving. But it's been 4 years, Mom. 4 years of you acting like a victim, like the world owes you something because you're a widow." The cruelty of reducing my grief to an inconvenience they'd endured was breathtaking. Robert hadn't just been my husband. He'd been my best friend, my partner, my anchor in the world. His death had shattered me in ways I was still discovering. But I tried so hard to be strong for my children, to not burden them with the depth of my loss. "You think we don't see it?" Jessica pressed on. "The way you manipulate situations to get attention, the way you guilt Michael into living here by charging him almost nothing for rent, the way you volunteer for everything at the school and the church just so people have to acknowledge you exist." Her words were surgical in their precision, cutting straight to insecurities I'd barely admitted to myself. Yes, I'd thrown myself into volunteer work after Robert died. Yes, I'd given Michael favorable rent terms because I was lonely in this big house. But I'd told myself these were acts of love and service, not desperate attempts to feel needed. Mom charges me practically nothing because she can afford to. Michael finally spoke up, but not in my defense. The house is paid off. Dad's life insurance was huge, and she's got more money than she knows what to do with. Even my financial stability, something I'd thought would give my children security, had been twisted into evidence of my selfishness. I was wealthy enough to be generous. Therefore, my generosity was meaningless. The twins had grown very quiet, sensing something terrible was happening but not understanding what. Tommy, the more sensitive of the two, had tears in his eyes. I wanted to comfort him, but I was drowning in my own emotional chaos. "The truth is," Jessica said, her voice dropping to a cold whisper that somehow hurt more than her shouting, "we've been talking about this for months. Michael and I both agree that you've become—" She paused, choosing her words like weapons. "A burden. An emotional burden that none of us signed up for." The word burden echoed in the sudden silence that followed. A burden. Not a mother, not a grandmother, not a woman deserving of basic respect and kindness. A burden to be managed, endured, and apparently discussed behind closed doors by the children I devoted my life to raising. I felt something crack inside my chest, something that had been holding me together for 4 years of widowhood and decades of putting everyone else's needs before my own. The careful smile I'd worn to every family gathering, every holiday, every difficult conversation finally slipped from my face, and in that moment of raw vulnerability, I made a decision that would change everything. The silence stretched like a tightrope about to snap. Jessica's words hung in the air between us. Burden. While my grandsons stared with the wide, frightened eyes of children witnessing something they couldn't comprehend. My chest felt tight, as if someone had wrapped steel bands around my ribs and was slowly tightening them. "A burden," I repeated softly, tasting the word like poison. "You've been discussing me like I'm a problem to be solved." "Don't be dramatic, Mom," Jessica snapped, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Perhaps she was realizing she'd gone too far, revealed too much of the contempt she'd been hiding behind dutiful daughter visits. "How long?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "How long have you and Michael been having these conversations about me?" Michael squirmed in his chair, suddenly finding his untouched mashed potatoes fascinating. "Mom, it's not like that. We're just worried about you. You seem so—" He gestured vaguely. "Needy lately?" Needy. Another word that landed like a slap. I thought back over recent months, analyzing every interaction through this new devastating lens. The times I'd called Jessica to share good news about my garden club's fundraiser, only to be met with distracted uh-huhs. The excitement I'd felt planning Michael's birthday dinner, cooking his favorite foods, only to watch him eat mechanically while scrolling through his phone. Had I been needy? Or had I simply been a woman trying to maintain connections with the people she loved most? "You want to know what needy looks like?" I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "Needy is your brother living in my basement for 3 months, eating my food, using my utilities, contributing nothing to the household except dirty laundry and attitude." Michael's head snapped up. "I pay rent. $300 a month for a space that would rent for $1,500, I replied. "Needy is your sister calling me every time she needs a babysitter, but being too busy to return my calls when I just want to hear about her day." Jessica's face flushed red. "We never asked you to—" "Needy," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, "is expecting me to host every holiday, cook every meal, remember every birthday and anniversary, while treating me like an inconvenience when I dare to exist in my own home." The truth was pouring out of me now, years of swallowed hurt and suppressed resentment finding voice. I stood up from my chair, no longer the accommodating mother trying to keep peace at any cost. "You want to know what's pathetic, Jessica? It's not a 58-year-old woman trying to rebuild her life after losing her husband. It's grown adults who've been taking advantage of their mother's grief and generosity while mocking her behind her back." "C'est Grandma Eleanor," Tommy whispered, reaching for my hand. "Are you okay?" His innocent touch nearly broke my resolve, but I gently squeezed his fingers and gave him the first genuine smile I'd managed all evening. "I'm going to be, sweetheart." Jessica stood abruptly, grabbing her purse with sharp, angry movements. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. The drama, the guilt trips, the manipulation. Come on, boys, we're leaving." "No." The word came out of me with such force that everyone froze. "Sit down, Jessica." "Excuse me?" I said sit down. "You've had your say, now you're going to listen to mine." Something in my tone must have penetrated her armor of self-righteousness because she remained standing but stopped moving toward the door. Michael looked between us like a spectator at a tennis match, clearly wishing he could disappear. "For 32 years, I've watched you grow from a sweet little girl into a woman I barely recognize," I said, looking directly at Jessica. "A woman who speaks to her mother with casual cruelty. A woman who teaches her children that it's acceptable to dismiss and disrespect the people who love them. I'm not finished." My voice cut through her protest. "You want to know what I discovered tonight? That I've been enabling both of you to treat me poorly by accepting it, by making excuses for your behavior, by telling myself that keeping the peace was more important than keeping my dignity." The room was completely silent except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Even the twins seemed to sense that something monumental was shifting. "I loved your father with everything I had," I continued, my voice softening slightly. "When he died, I felt like half of me died with him. But I kept going because I thought you needed me. I threw myself into being the perfect mother and grandmother because I thought that's what would honor his memory and keep our family together." Tears were streaming down my face now, but I wasn't crying out of sadness anymore. I was crying out of a grief so deep and pure, it felt like cleansing rain. What I realize now is that I've been dishonoring myself and your father's memory by accepting treatment that he never would have tolerated. Your father respected me. He valued my opinions, celebrated my accomplishments, and made me feel like I mattered. The fight seemed to go out of Jessica suddenly. She sank back into her chair, but her expression remained defiant. "So, here's what's going to happen," I said, wiping my eyes with my napkin. "Things are going to change, starting now." The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd survived a natural disaster. My eyes were swollen from crying, my head pounded from the emotional storm of the previous evening, but underneath the physical discomfort was something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. Jessica had left the night before with barely another word, gathering her boys and her righteous indignation and storming out of my house. Michael had retreated to the basement immediately after dinner, the sound of his video games echoing through the heating vents until well past midnight. But for the first time in months, the noise didn't keep me awake with worry about his future or guilt about my failure as a mother. I'd spent 4 years since Robert's death trying to be everything to everyone, shrinking myself to fit into smaller and smaller spaces in other people's lives. No more. I started with Michael. At precisely 8 a.m., I knocked on the basement door and waited for his groggy response before entering. His living space was a disaster zone of empty pizza boxes, dirty clothes, and art supplies scattered across every surface. The smell of unwashed laundry and stale food made me wrinkle my nose. "We need to talk," I said, stepping carefully around a pile of canvases. "Mom, it's early. Can we do this later?" "No, we can't." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. "I'm transferring $5,000 into your account. That should cover first month's rent, last month's rent, and security deposit on an apartment." He sat up in bed, suddenly alert. "What? You have 30 days to find a place and move out." "But Mom, I can't afford—" "You can't afford not to," I interrupted. "Michael, you're 29 years old. You have a college degree and genuine artistic talent. The only thing standing between you and independence is the comfort of living in my basement for almost nothing." His face cycled through confusion, anger, and something that might have been panic. "This is because of what Jessica said last night, isn't it? She was out of line, but that doesn't mean you should take it out on me." "This isn't punishment," I said, sitting on the edge of his unmade bed. "This is me doing what I should have done months ago. I've been enabling you to stay stuck instead of encouraging you to grow." Over the next hour, we had the most honest conversation we'd had in years. I told him about the creative writing class I'd been wanting to take, but hadn't because I felt guilty spending time away from being available for his needs. He admitted that living at home had made him feel like a failure, that every day in my basement reminded him of everything he wasn't accomplishing. "I know you think I don't appreciate what you've done for me," he said finally, "but I do. I got comfortable being taken care of, and I got comfortable being needed," I replied. "We both have to change." The conversation with Michael, difficult as it was, felt like the beginning of something healthier between us. The conversation I knew I needed to have with Jessica would be much harder. That afternoon, I drove to her office in downtown Hartford. Jessica worked as a marketing director for a mid-sized insurance company, and I'd never visited her workplace before. I'd always accepted her explanation that she was too busy for personal visits during work hours, but today I realized I'd been accepting a lot of things that weren't actually acceptable. The receptionist seemed surprised when I asked to see Jessica Matthews Peterson, explaining that I was her mother. Within 5 minutes, Jessica appeared in the lobby, her professional facade barely concealing her irritation. "Mom, what are you doing here? I'm in the middle of a presentation prep." "I need 5 minutes of your time," I said calmly. We sat in her office surrounded by awards and photos of her family, notably none of which included me. The omission stung, but it also clarified something important about how she saw me fitting into her life. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," I began, "about being a burden." Jessica's expression softened slightly. "Mom, I was stressed about work. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I said quietly. "And you were partially right." Her eyebrows rose in surprise. "I have been a burden, but not in the way you think. I've been a burden to myself by accepting less respect and consideration than I deserve. I've been a burden to you by not setting proper boundaries, by trying so hard to be indispensable that I forgot to be authentic." I pulled an envelope from my purse and placed it on her desk. "This is a letter I wrote this morning. It outlines some changes that are going to happen in our relationship." Jessica opened the envelope and read silently. I watched her expression change as she processed my new boundaries. No more last-minute babysitting requests without proper advance notice and compensation. No more hosting every holiday without shared responsibility and appreciation. No more accepting disrespectful treatment from her or allowing her children to witness such behavior. "This feels like an ultimatum," she said when she finished reading. "It's not an ultimatum. It's a roadmap to a healthier relationship between us," I replied. "I love you, Jessica, but I love myself too, and I refuse to continue sacrificing one for the other." As I drove home that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about my own future. For the first time since Robert's death, I was making decisions based on what I wanted rather than what others expected of me. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my sister Patricia in California, the one person who'd consistently encouraged me to stand up for myself over the years. "Eleanor," she exclaimed when she heard my voice, "you sound different, stronger." I told her everything: the dinner, the confrontations, the changes I was making. She listened without judgment, offering support and encouragement. "I'm proud of you," she said finally. Robert would be proud of you too." As I hung up the phone, I realized Patricia was right. Robert would be proud. He'd spent our entire marriage encouraging me to value myself, to pursue my interests, to never let anyone, including our children, treat me as less than I was worth. I'd forgotten that lesson in my grief, but I was remembering it now. 3 weeks after that devastating dinner, my phone rang at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. Our relationship had been in a state of cold détente since my visit to her office, polite but distant text messages about logistics, no family dinners, no casual calls. "Hello, Jessica." "Mom." Her voice was different, smaller somehow, lacking the sharp edge I'd grown accustomed to. "Can we talk? I mean, really talk?" "Of course. Not over the phone. Can I come over? The boys are at Brad's mother's house tonight." An hour later, my daughter sat in my living room, looking younger than she had in years. Gone was the armor of professional confidence and maternal authority. In its place was something vulnerable and uncertain that reminded me of the teenage Jessica who used to curl up on this same couch to tell me about her problems. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, fidgeting with her wedding ring. "About Dad, about respect, about..." She took a shaky breath. "About the kind of woman I've become." I waited, sensing that this conversation needed her to lead it. "I talked to Brad about our dinner fight," she continued. "I expected him to take my side, to agree that you were being dramatic or manipulative or whatever. But he didn't." Her voice cracked slightly. "He said he'd been wondering when I was going to start treating you the way I treat everyone else in my life, with basic courtesy and kindness. He said watching me with you made him worry about how I might treat him when we're older." The admission seemed to cost her something. Jessica had always prided herself on her marriage, on being the kind of wife and mother she thought represented success. "He was right, wasn't he?" she whispered. "I've been terrible to you. You've been hurt and angry," I said carefully. "We all process grief differently." "No," she shook her head firmly. "Don't make excuses for me. I need to own this." Over the next 2 hours, my daughter did something she hadn't done since childhood. She told me the truth about her feelings. She talked about watching me fall apart after her father's death and feeling simultaneously heartbroken for me and angry that I wasn't strong enough to help her process her own grief. She admitted to resenting the way I'd thrown myself into being the perfect grandmother because it made her feel like she wasn't good enough as a mother. "When Dad died, I felt like I lost both parents," she said through tears. "You were there physically, but emotionally you were gone. And instead of trying to understand what you were going through, I just got mad that you weren't taking care of me anymore." Her honesty was devastating and healing at the same time. I realized that in my desperate attempt to maintain normalcy for my children after Robert's death, I'd hidden my grief so completely that they'd never learned to support me through it. "I stopped seeing you as a person with your own needs and feelings," Jessica continued. "You became this function, the grandmother role, the hostess role, the caretaker role. I forgot that, underneath all of that, you were a woman who'd lost the love of her life and was trying to figure out how to keep living." "I forgot that too for a while," I admitted. We talked until nearly midnight, untangling years of misunderstanding and misplaced expectations. Jessica apologized, genuinely, specifically, and without making excuses. She asked about my writing class, my book club, my volunteer work, showing interest in my life as a separate person rather than just her mother. "I want to be better," she said as she prepared to leave. "I want the boys to see a different example of how to treat people you love. Will you help me learn how to do that?" "Yes," I said, hugging her for the first time in months. "But, Jessica, it has to be consistent. I won't go back to accepting disrespect just because we had one good conversation. I understand. I'll prove it to you. The change wasn't immediate or perfect, but it was real. Jessica started calling just to check in, not because she needed something. She began including me in family plans instead of presenting me with obligations. Most importantly, she started speaking to me with the same respect she showed her friends and colleagues. Michael, meanwhile, had found an apartment in New Haven and was preparing to move out. The prospect of independence had sparked something in him that I hadn't seen in years. He'd started applying for teaching positions at local art centers and had even sold 2 paintings to a small gallery downtown. "I'm scared," he admitted the night before his move. But it's a good scared, like when I was a kid and Dad would take us to the top of that big slide at the playground. Your father always said courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and choosing to act anyway, I reminded him. On moving day, both my children showed up to help Michael pack. It was the first time we'd all been in the same space since that terrible dinner, and the difference in our dynamic was remarkable. We worked together as a team, sharing memories as we packed up his childhood belongings, treating each other with kindness and consideration. As I watched my children laugh together while loading Michael's art supplies into the truck, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because our work was finished, relationships require constant tending, but because we'd finally begun building something sustainable. That evening, after Michael was settled in his new place and Jessica had gone home to her family, I sat in my quiet house and realized something amazing. I wasn't lonely. For the first time since Robert's death, being alone felt peaceful rather than empty. I'd learned to be good company for myself again. 6 months later, I stood in the community center classroom, watching 12 women of various ages bent over their notebooks, pens moving across pages as they captured their thoughts in response to my writing prompt. At 59, I discovered something remarkable. I was a good teacher. The creative writing class I'd been wanting to take had led to an opportunity to teach one when the regular instructor went on maternity leave. What started as a temporary position had turned into something I genuinely loved, helping other women find their voices on the page. "Remember," I said, walking between the desks, "your first draft doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest." Among my students was Margaret Chen, a 73-year-old retired nurse who was writing her memoirs, and Sarah Williams, a 35-year-old mother of 3 who was rediscovering her passion for poetry. The age range in my classes reminded me daily that reinvention and growth aren't limited by the number of candles on your birthday cake. After class, I drove to Michael's apartment to see his latest paintings. His new space was small but organized, filled with natural light and the productive energy of someone pursuing their passion. His artwork had evolved too, becoming bolder, more confident, more authentically his own. "I got the job," he announced as soon as I walked in, his face glowing with excitement. "The head instructor position at the Middletown Art Center. Full-time, benefits, everything." I hugged him tightly, remembering the dejected young man who'd lived in my basement just months ago. Independence had been the catalyst he'd needed to believe in himself again. "Your father would be so proud," I told him, and for the first time in years, mentioning Robert felt like sharing joy rather than reopening a wound. "I know," Michael said simply. "I feel him sometimes, you know? When I'm painting something I'm really excited about, I can almost hear him cheering me on." That evening, I had dinner with Jessica's family, but this time at their house, with all of us sharing the cooking responsibilities. The twins helped me make salad while Jessica handled the main course and Brad managed dessert. The conversation flowed naturally, with everyone contributing and no one dominating. "Grandma Eleanor," Tyler said during dinner, Mom says you're helping other ladies learn to write stories. That's right, sweetheart. Are they good stories? They're brave stories, I said, smiling at Jessica. And that's the most important kind. After dinner, while the boys played in the backyard and Brad cleaned up the kitchen, Jessica and I sat on her back porch with cups of tea. These quiet moments together had become precious to both of us, opportunities to connect as women rather than just mother and daughter. I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately, she said, watching her sons chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Not in the sad way, like before, in the grateful way. What do you mean? I'm grateful he modeled what a healthy marriage looks like. Brad and I have been talking about the legacy we want to leave the boys, and we realized it starts with how we treat each other and the people we love. She paused, sipping her tea thoughtfully. I'm grateful he loved you so completely, because it means I know what that looks like. I want the boys to see that same respect between Brad and me. He did love me completely, I agreed. But more than that, he expected me to love myself completely too. I lost that for a while. Have you found it again? I considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, I would have said my worth was entirely tied up in being useful to my children. Now I knew my value existed independently of anyone else's opinion or need. I'm finding it, I said finally. Every day, a little more. The following Saturday, I did something that would have terrified me a year ago. I went to a dinner party alone. Patricia had connected me with her friend Robert's widow, Linda, who lived just an hour away in Springfield, Massachusetts. Linda had invited me to a gathering of what she called her chosen family, a group of friends who'd created their own support network. The evening was revelatory. I found myself in conversations about books, travel, politics, and art with people who saw me as Eleanor the writer, Eleanor the teacher, Eleanor the woman, not just Eleanor, the mother or grandmother. For 4 hours I existed completely as myself, and it felt like coming home. As I drove back to Connecticut that night, I thought about the letter I'd written to myself on my 59th birthday the week before. In it, I'd made a list of goals for the coming year: take a painting class, visit Patricia in California, maybe even consider dating again someday. The list was ambitious and entirely focused on my own growth and happiness. Robert had always said that the best gift you can give your children is the example of a life well lived. For years after his death, I'd thought that meant sacrificing everything for their happiness. Now I understood it meant something quite different. It meant showing them what it looks like to value yourself, to set healthy boundaries, to continue growing and evolving no matter what life throws at you. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Thank you for showing us what strength looks like. Dad would be proud of the woman you're becoming. I smiled, saving the message before putting my phone away. The woman I was becoming felt very much like the woman I'd always been underneath, the one Robert had fallen in love with 40 years ago, the one who'd raised 2 children while managing her own career, the one who'd survived devastating loss and found her way back to joy. That woman had never actually disappeared, never. She'd just been waiting patiently for me to remember she was worth fighting for. As I pulled into my driveway, I looked at my house. No longer an empty nest, but a sanctuary. A place where I was free to be completely myself. Tomorrow I would tend my garden, work on the short story I was submitting to a literary magazine, and prepare for another week of teaching women to find their voices. At 59, I was finally living a life that honored both my love for my family and my love for myself. And if you're watching this story and struggling with similar challenges, remember, it's never too late to reclaim your worth. Like and subscribe if this resonates with you, and know that your second act can be your strongest yet. The best stories, after all, are the ones where the heroine saves herself.